Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Times are changing, so are laws and norms, and this is the case whether we're talking about our personal lives or our workplace experience. When it comes to the idea of transparency at the workplace, employees tend to see transparency as trustworthy and respectful, both of which are a good thing at the workplace. When we look at the idea of pay transparency specifically, there are two things that we need to consider, and those are distributive and procedural justice. Distributive justice focuses on fairness. This is the perceived fairness of things such as salaries and benefits. Employees tend to assess how their pay and their benefits compare to the pay and benefits of others. They assess the fairness of what they are paid in terms of their contributions and their efforts as compared to others around them. This is where equity, equality, and need come into play. Procedural justice, on the other hand, refers to the fairness of how compensation was decided upon, how the decision was made of what to pay specific employees or each employee. In other words, how was it determined? How was it decided what everyone gets paid for their efforts? Procedural justice tends to emphasize transparency, consistency, and impartiality in the decision-making process. Employees are much more likely to accept whatever the outcome is if they see the procedures as being fair. Both distributive justice and procedural justice are equally as important when it comes to pay, transparency, and the workplace. When there's a balance between the two, this is where we're much more likely to have a workplace and a workforce that is satisfied with their jobs and their experiences at the workplace. Employees are much more likely to express job satisfaction and to have trust in the organization. When organizations focus on prioritizing both distributive and procedural justice and keeping a good balance between them, they can expect a higher morale and a lower turnover within the organization. This is where perceived fairness drives retention and engagement. When it comes to pay transparency, there are some realities that need to be addressed and understood. First and foremost, when pay transparency is in place, when it exists, compensation effects must be recognized. This means that there may be gaps in pay, gaps that must be identified and corrected. There may be some discomfort, especially with management. And of course, we must take into consideration what should be disclosed, whether those should be exact numbers or rather salary ranges. Managers and leadership in general have a tremendous responsibility within organizations. They have to audit inequities. If there are identified obvious inequalities in terms of pay, where equal pay for equal work or equal effort is not easily identified within the company, this is something that has to be corrected, has to be rectified. Pay transparency can be a tool to get an organization to the point where that happens. But if not done properly, pay transparency can only reveal information that can lead to potential issues. The other thing to consider is the idea of making available the exact pay or salary numbers versus pay ranges. Generally speaking, publishing pay ranges is a better option than divulging exact numbers. Pay ranges allow for pay transparency while still allowing individuals to retain some sense of privacy in an otherwise transparent situation. There's a definite need for organizations to train their managers how to have productive conversations regarding compensation. While in many organizations it is the HR professionals who may have those skills, it is just as important for management and leadership to be competent when it comes to having those potentially difficult conversations. As much as pay transparency can benefit the organization and its employees, it's important to remember that this can also be a sensitive topic for many. This is where skilled conversations must come into consideration. Open and honest communications are key. Being able to ask and receive answers, especially for some of the most common questions that pertain to pay within an organization, is critical, especially when we want to prevent rumors and speculation. So as far as the employer is considered, it's important to audit and correct any inequities. Publish compensation ranges with context so that it is meaningful to the conversation, to the topic. Train management to be able to have productive and respectful conversations regarding compensation. And keep the communications open so that questions can be answered without risking rumors and speculation to take over instead. Just as the employer has certain responsibilities that pertain to pay transparency, so too the employees of the organization. Employees must educate themselves on how to read a pay range. What exactly does the range include? What is the context? What qualifies for the lowest and the highest pay? And what qualifies a candidate to fall somewhere in the middle? Knowing the pay range is only part of the information. Understanding the details and understanding the context of that pay range is important. Every employee will benefit from documenting how they contribute to the company, not only the regular responsibilities and the regular tasks, but anything extra, anything where they have gone above and beyond to contribute to the organization. And finally, every individual employee has the responsibility of preparing themselves to have productive compensation conversations with their employer. This is something that you may want to practice or even seek help from a third party on how such conversations should go and what will be most productive for you when you're having a compensation conversation. It's important to remember that transparency, whether it's pay transparency or anything else, will likely touch many different layers within the organization, which means that when expecting transparency from others, we must realize that there will likely have to be some kind of transparency regarding our business as well. Organizations interested in implementing pay transparency within the company can achieve this with a simple 90-day plan or 90-day roadmap. Of course, simple doesn't mean that it won't require work and effort, but a good starting point is to identify pay ranges and guidelines pertaining to compensation. Make sure you train your management to have productive and respectful conversations pertaining to pay and compensation, and keep track of your success with clear metrics. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Pay transparency is part of a new experience at the workplace. Norms and sometimes even laws have changed. Employees equate transparency with respect and trust. Transparency can lead to greater retention, lower turnover, better morale, and greater job satisfaction. When considering pay transparency, it's important to remember distributive and procedural justice. These are about fairness, equal pay for equal work or equal efforts, and fairness in how compensation decisions are made, how they are reached. Both are important, especially when balanced properly. Of course, there are risks and realities of pay transparency. This is where pay gaps and management discomfort can come into the light, but they can also be opportunities for improvement and forward movement for the organization. Employers and employees have an equal opportunity and responsibility to contribute when it comes to the idea of pay transparency. Employers must audit and correct inequities, train their managers, publish pay ranges with context, and keep the communications open to prevent speculation and rumors. Employees have the opportunity and responsibility to understand pay ranges, practice having productive compensation conversations, and document all their contributions that can be brought up during such conversations. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider pay transparency at your organization, whether you're the employer or the employee. Take what you've learned in today's episode and apply it to your own experience in such a way that it can benefit both you and the organization. Remember, transparency, whether it's pay transparency or other types of transparency, comes with many benefits but also responsibilities. If you're seeking transparency and information about someone else, chances are you will have to disclose the same information about your experience. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G is found on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.